spotlight Sam Fletcher, and I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you to NYCPG for this invitation and for partnering with us at NASW New York State as well. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I was telling Jamie before we started that this presentation I presented, a million times on different things, but this one means the most to me. So I hope you enjoy it. My name is Sam Fletcher, and I am the Executive Director of the New York State chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. I received my MSW and my PhD from the University at Albany School of Social Welfare. And my social work background has been macro. I've worked primarily in research, program evaluation, program development, and administration. It's very difficult for me to talk about myself, and I'll tell you why later in the presentation. But while I'm introducing myself as that's not the primary reason I'm here today. The primary reason I'm here today is because of how I identify. So I just wanted to go over our agenda for today so you know what to expect. So I'm going to really divide the time in this training between Native history, Native culture, and client engagement with Native people. And then there'll be time at the end for question and answers. Okay, so I am a member of the Cherokee Nation and of the Bird Clan of that nation. My tribe is located, the reservation is located in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, but us Cherokees are found all over the world. I will be referring to my son quite often. He is a member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho Nation, which is the reservation is located in Concho, Oklahoma, and that's actually a much smaller tribe. There's only about 7,000 members of his tribe left. So I just want to start by saying that Native cultures are diverse and Native people are diverse. I can't represent all Native people, even if I wanted to, nor can I represent every tribe. Nor can I represent everyone within my tribe. So I just want to make sure I reiterate that so that no one thinks I'm speaking on behalf of all Native people. There are members of Native tribes who engage in culture in different ways, and different tribes engage in culture in different ways. One of the main reasons of this is because of the cultural genocide that happened to our people. And I'm going to go in more depth in that as we go through the history. I want to point out the racial diversity of Native people. So when you look at me, I have full white privilege. Most people don't identify me as Native. When I had my natural dark hair, some people would think I was Native, but especially now that I no longer have dark hair, I don't get identified as that. And I think it's very important to recognize that the experiences of darker tribal members are very different than my experience. They often face racism. My son is quite a bit darker than me, and he faces racism all the time. There are many tribes that look very diverse. My tribe looks like the UN. We have the whitest white person to the blackest black person and every shade in between. And you will find that diversity in many Native tribes. Okay, I included the last bullet point because this comes up a lot. Like, what do we call you? Like, what is an appropriate name? The answer to that is to always ask the person that you're talking to or meeting with what they prefer to be called. I'm from Oklahoma. Oklahoma is Indian territory. We tend to refer to ourselves as Indians, but there are tribes that do not use that term and do not like that term. A lot of times Native people, we just refer to ourselves as our tribe. So I very often will say that I am Cherokee. My son will say I am Cheyenne and Arapaho. That is, our tribe is our identity. But some other names that you use, I also use Native a lot when describing my people. Some people use Native American, Indigenous, or First Nations. But again, always ask the people from the tribe that you're talking to or working with. So by the end of today, hopefully you will be able to discuss how the historical treatment of Native tribes and people may impact therapeutic engagement. You should be able to identify two common elements of Native culture, and you should be able to describe two engagement techniques to use with Native clients seeking addiction or problem gambling services. Oh. I apologize. I broke my ankle 2 weeks ago and my crutches just fell. That's what that noise was.
Right.
But I don't need them, so we're good. Okay. So now we're going to move to Native history. Oh, sorry. Okay. I was taught the history of my people through elders in my tribe. They taught me the history pre-1492, which I refer to as the beginning of the genocide of our people, because that's when the Europeans came. And when the history was taught to me, this was the first history that was taught to me, was the way that my people lived for thousands of years before Europeans came to America. So while I was learning this as a child from the elders, I learned that we were a matriarchal society. So a lot of our leaders tend to be women, and the women tend to make decisions, although I'm going to talk more about how that works when we get to culture. We also learned immediately in Native culture, the land is incredibly important to Native people. We have a symbiotic relationship with the land and the animals on the land. So that's always part of what we learn in our history. I also learned how our people organized and how they lived on a daily basis. So we would learn about the different roles of the tribe and what the different people in those roles would do. As I was learning that, I was also doing what those people did. So like we would learn how to weave baskets. We would learn like how to throw tomahawks. We would learn, you know, everything that our ancestors did, we would learn as we were learning our culture. I also learned about our history after the Europeans came. So I'm using 1492 because of course that's the year that Columbus came. At the time that he came, there were between 5 and 15 million natives that were stretched across what is now the United States. Every inch of it was covered with Native people and Native tribes. Then within about 300, 400 years, we were almost completely decimated, down to 238 people. So what did the genocide look like? Well, it was a combination of murder and as well as bringing in foreign diseases, and then also removing us from our ancestral lands. So when the Europeans came, they were exploiting the land, using it much differently than Native people use it. The respect we have with the land is so symbiotic that we respect the land. We call the land Mother Earth. We respect all things on the land, including the animals. And when the Europeans came on, they were attracted to things in the land that we didn't see as value, such as gold and different minerals. And we're trying to get ownership of the land that had those things on it, as well as killing the animals and selling them for their furs in different trades. I want to show you a couple of maps so you can see what I'm talking about. So this first map is what the land looked like at 1492. So as you can see, the tribes cover the United States. My tribe, the Cherokee, are in purple in the southeast region. I'm circling it with my mouse. My son's tribe, Cheyenne and Arapaho, were Plains natives, and they're in more of the central part of the United States. Now, the next map I'm going to show you shows how this changed drastically in a 100-year period. So the white on the screen, when I share the next screen, indicates where the Europeans were, and then it shows you how they removed the natives from the land systematically over about a 100-year period. So it starts in 1784. And again, the white is the Europeans as they move westward. The green are the Native tribes as they disappeared. And then these are the present day Native reservations. So as you can see, in that period of time, we were almost completely taken off the face of the earth. I'm going to go a little bit more into the murder and the removal of the Native people. I'm going to talk about some of the battles and some of the wars during the American Indian Wars. I think it's also important to keep in mind that once these wars ended, that the federal government suppressed all attempts for tribal independence. So there was still a marked effort to keep us from, taking back our ancestral lands or even keeping the lands that we were given through treaties. So in March 1622, the Powhatan Indians attacked and killed colonists in Eastern Virginia. This was in Jamestown. The attack gave the English government an excuse to justify their efforts to attack and kill Indians and to confiscate land. In the 1700s, the later 1700s, during the American Revolution, tribes chose different things. So some tribes chose to fight with the British. My tribe fought with the British. Other tribes fought with the American patriots. And then other tribes stayed completely out of the war. It didn't matter which side or if they stayed completely out of the Revolutionary War, the Native people lost. They weren't included in any of the peace talks or any of the division of anything. And in fact, we ended up losing more land after the American Revolution. I want to talk about the Seminole people. The Seminole, their ancestral land is in Florida. In 1816, the first war with the Seminole tribe began with the US Army attacking the Seminoles. They fought side by runaway slaves. Oftentimes, runaway slaves would become tribal members, and their descendants are tribal members today. We typically refer to them as the freedmen within the tribe. So the Seminoles and the freedmen fought, and they were able to maintain the land in the 1816 war. But it didn't last long. In 1835, the US Army returned, and this time they killed many more Seminole people, although they were able to maintain the land. And then in 1855, the third and final Seminole War, there were too few Seminole left, and they were defeated, and they agreed to move to the Indian reservations of Oklahoma. The next battle I want to talk about is my son's tribe, the Southern Cheyenne Arapaho natives. In 1864, they were massacred by Colonel John Chivington's Colorado volunteers at Sand Creek, Colorado. The causes of this massacre were rooted in the long conflict for control of the Great Plains of Eastern Colorado. In 1864, the governor of Colorado met with Black Kettle and several other chiefs to forge a new peace, and all parties left satisfied. Black Kettle moved his band to Fort Lyon, Colorado, where the commanding officer encouraged him to hunt near Sand Creek. In what can only be considered an act of treachery, Colonel Chivington moved his troops to the plains, and they attacked the Native Americans, scattering men, women, and children and hunting them down. The casualties reflect the one-sided nature of the fight. 9 of Chivington's men were killed, and 148 of Black Kettle's followers were slaughtered. More than half of them were women and children. Chivington's men came back after the massacre and killed the wounded and mutilated their bodies and then set fire to the camp. And the last battle I want to talk about is with the Sioux Indians. So in the late 19th century, the Sioux Indian ghost dancers believed a specific dance ritual would reunite them with the dead and bring peace and prosperity. In December 1890, the US Army surrounded a group of ghost dancers at Wounded Knee Creek near the Pine Ridge Reservation of South Dakota. During the ensuing massacre, fighting broke out and 150 natives were slaughtered.
Could I get whoever is not muted to mute, please? I'm going to mute everybody, Sam. You might have to unmute. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Now if you unmute for some reason. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. The Wounded Knee Massacre was the last major conflict between the US government and the Plains natives. I want to talk about a little bit, point out the language that was used to kill Native people. I keep referring to this as a genocide of our people. And what's common in genocide is how we dehumanize the people that we're trying to kill off. So this happened to my people. We were referred to as savages. We were referred to as animals many times. And the best proof of this is in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. So I pulled a couple of lines to read to you to point this out. When I say he, it's referring to the King of England. So this comes straight from the Declaration of Independence. He has plundered our seas, ravished our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. And then 2 sentences down, it says, he has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. This language is hypocritical in its details about how they were treated by the British, as well as how they describe Native people in the very same text. Finally, I just want to bring to your attention the policies that perpetuated the genocide. So the 1830 Indian Removal Act by President Andrew Jackson was meant to remove the tribes that were in the Southeast so that the Americans would have access to that land. The Choctaws, the Muskogee Creeks, and the Chickasaws were removed almost immediately and moved to Oklahoma. They were part of the Trail of Tears, as were my people, the Cherokee. On the Trail of Tears, many of our people died. They were killed. They died from the conditions of the move. With the Muskogee Creeks, there's reports of them having their boats sunk in the Mississippi River as they were crossing, and several reports of rape of the women every night during the move. And my tribe, the Cherokee, refused to move. They were forcibly removed in 1838. 16,000 Cherokee started this journey, and a quarter of them died during the journey. My tribe does commemorate this every year with a bike ride to honor our ancestors who made this move. So that was the actual genocide. I want to talk about cultural genocide. So once most of our people were killed, the people that remained, there was a concerted effort to either change those people or to completely take them out. This happened through government and church-run boarding schools. So the boarding schools started like in the early mid 1800s and continued throughout the middle of the 1900s. Over a 100-year period, hundreds of thousands of Native children were taken from their homes and stripped of their culture. They specifically targeted the children of chiefs and warriors to try to weaken the tribes. The children were moved hundreds and thousands of miles away from their people. So when they were taken from their land and moved to these boarding schools, they were forced to cut their hair. They were forced to not dress in their tribal clothing. They were forced to not use their language. They were not allowed to practice any cultural traditions, or to the saying that the Europeans were using was kill the Indian, save the man. So every effort was made to strip everything that was Native about them from them. By 1926, 83% of Native children were in boarding schools, 83%. In the boarding schools, the children were physically, mentally, and sexually abused. Many of them died, and they were often tortured when they were caught using their language or adhering to cultural practices. Earlier this summer, there was a mass grave found at a Canadian boarding school with the Native children. This prompted our first Native cabinet member, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, to announce a federal investigation into the government oversight of boarding schools in the United States. And I do want to point out that some of the first youth have been reunited with the remains of the youth have been reunited with their tribe. So a few weeks ago, 9 Lakotan youth who had been taken from their homes and died in a boarding school in Pennsylvania were reunited with the tribe as female warriors, female veterans watched over the ceremony. This is a picture of that Pennsylvania boarding school I was just talking about. I just want you to take a second and look at the faces of these children. The trauma is quite evident. You can see in their face that they've been stripped from everything they know and everything they are. There are approximately 6.8 million natives, or about 2% in the United States today. There are 574 federal and state recognized tribes. And I've listed the states with the top 10 highest percentage of native populations. I did want to let you know, I have embedded within the slides, which Jamie's going to share with you, different links to the things I'm talking about today, and in case you want to learn more or read more about them. So I've spent, about 20 minutes talking about history that I barely scratched the surface, as you can do in 20 minutes. But I hope that it gives you enough of a background to help when we get to the engagement part. And now we're going to transition into culture. So again, every tribe and native person is different. I do want to touch base on tribal affiliation and enrollment. Each tribe has its own criteria for enrolling in the tribe. The tribe sets that through their own governments. Tribal affiliation enrollment is different than identity. Enrollment in a tribe connects Native people to more resources, that they can engage in the resources from that tribe. But if someone's not enrolled in their tribe, it doesn't mean they're not Native, and it has nothing to do with their identity. I never ask Native people if they're enrolled in their tribe. I don't care. They're Native. And I've never had Native people ask me if I'm enrolled in my tribe, unless it has to do specifically with the enrollment of the tribe. Native tribes are ostensibly sovereign with fully functioning societies. The reason I put ostensibly there, well, first let me talk about what sovereign means. Sovereign means that we have our own criminal justice system. We usually have our own education system, our own child welfare system. We are functioning societies within reservations that run ourselves. We have our own government, our own way of doing things. The reason I put ostensibly is that federal policies, since the United States has become a nation, have been passed repeatedly to negate that sovereignty and to not allow the nations to operate under their own rules. One example of this is the Violence Against Women Act. In the original bill in 1994, Native women weren't even included in the bill. And then with different, when they would update the bill, they included more protections for Native women. But what was left out was that if a person commits a crime against a Native person on a reservation and they are not Native, the tribe cannot prosecute them. And it was up to the federal government to prosecute that person for injuring a Native woman. And usually they would not do that. Only very few cases went to trial. And there are still parts of that that exist today. So that's why I say ostensibly. Land acknowledgement. So land acknowledgements, I'm going to say, at least to me, are relatively new. Native people, the land is so intricate to who we are as a people that we talk about it all the time. The land is a part of us and we are a part of the land in this symbiotic relationship. The land, it feeds us, it nurtures us, it heals us, it protects us. And we are called to respect the land and treat the land the same. But for non-natives, there's been a movement where when some people get together, they'll give what's called a land acknowledgement, and they'll acknowledge the original ancestors of that land or the original guardians of that land. Native people tend to give a land acknowledgement differently than non-natives. I have a link in here to click on that if you want to give a land acknowledgement, it gives you tips on how to give the land acknowledgement from Native perspective. But again, like I said, it's inherent to us. We always talk about the land and honor the land. When I talk about the land, I also just talk about animals because the animals are a part of the land. The land is a living being and the animals are a living being that we live with here. We are very connected to them. We use the land and animals in our stories. A lot of names will have animals. My son's birth grandmother's name was Yellow Eagle. We have spirit animals. A spirit animal is an animal that you connect deeply with, that you seek to embody, and that you have the characteristics of the animal. And I like to tell a story of when I became a parent, I wasn't around a lot of elders at the time, which is who I would have turned to for parenting advice and different things. So I actually looked to the animals, and I looked to marsupials because the marsupials are the closest to human babies. They have their babies before they can find their own food source, before they can walk, just like human babies. So I looked at koala bears and kangaroos and how they cared for their young and how long they did certain things. And that's what I used as my guide. So I always kind of like to give that example. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some common lifestyle traits of Native people. We are a collective. We are a collective culture. It's never about me. It's always about we. And the most important thing about you in a collective culture is how you interact with others and contribute to your tribe. So it's very hard for us to talk about ourselves. That's why I said at the beginning, it's hard. It's hard for me to tell you what I do or what I've done, because when we talk about ourselves, it's usually in relation to our people, to our tribe, to our family, to people. And I like to give the story. My daughter just graduated in June. She was the valedictorian of her class, and the school asked for a biography from her, and she couldn't write it. And so I had to write it for her, because you don't talk about yourself. It's not part of our culture. And the same thing happened to me when I came to NASW. My friend wrote my biography because I couldn't write mine either. It's very anti our culture to do that. So hierarchy looks a little different. While we have leaders, we have chiefs, and we have elders in our communities, hierarchy is not the same as in the Western world. The chief or the leader of a tribe serves the people. So the leader is there to make sure everyone else has what they need to do what they need to do. So like, I remember learning about this when I was learning about the history of my people and my ancestors. And it would be like, the hunter saying, well, I don't want to hunt because I think it's more important to, make the teepees. Like, you wouldn't do that. You do what you're good at and what you contribute to the tribe. So it's, the leader will often make decisions, but that's not done in a silo. That's always done with the consult of many other people. They'll be responsible for those decisions, even if they weren't the ones to make the decision. I give an example that my son works at a grocery store, and I work as the executive director of NASW. These are the same level in our house, because we both work jobs that bring honor to our family and that are respectful. So they're considered the same. Self-determination and autonomy is incredibly important to our people. And I think just hearing the history of our people and what's happened to us, you can understand why that would be really important. Storytelling is used all the time in Native cultures. I very rarely will say yes or no to anything. I always have a story to tell whatever it is. We use stories as a way of making meaning. We explain creation, we explain behavior, we warn against negative consequences. We tell our history through stories, and we often use animals, nature, and the elements in our storytelling. State of being and feelings. So this is something that has come up a lot, especially with me being like a parent. I seek to be at a place of peace at all times. Feelings come and go, but being at a constant state of being is a different thing. So I can remember while I was raising my kids, hearing people say, I just want my kids to be happy. And I always said, and I say to my kids to this day, I don't care if you're happy. Your happiness means nothing to me. That's an emotion. Sometimes you'll feel happy and sometimes you won't. And there's times I don't want you to feel happy, because what would make you happy would cause hurt to another person. So in that time, I don't want you to be happy. I want you to seek a state of peace in your life. And the emotions will come and go, but you want to seek a state of being. It's the same thing. I put pride there. I don't tell my kids I'm proud of them. I said that in a meeting one time, and someone was like, what do you mean? Well, they don't need my pride in them. So what I always ask them is, are you proud of yourself? Are you satisfied with the job that you've done? And that's all you need. You don't need to seek that from other people. You can give that to yourself. So this is kind of a separation from like living within emotions to living within a state of being. Time, I always say time is a suggestion in Native culture. Even doing this training is incredibly difficult on me. I'm already behind schedule, I can see. And because in my culture, we would talk until we were done. So like, you can't say we'll be done in an hour, because how do we know? You might have questions and I would want to answer those questions. So time is very difficult. I put research example. When I was in my PhD program, I took a class and the instructor said, if you're interviewing someone for your research and you tell them the interview is going to last an hour and you go over that time, that's unethical. Well, in my culture, it would be unethical to hold an interview for just an hour and then leave. I used elders in my research and I cleared the whole day when I had an interview, because I wasn't going to go over and just use them for what I needed. I spent time with them. Then we'd go to lunch and then we would visit. So again, that, that comes down to culture. And then of course, language is inherent to culture. And with the genocide of our people and the cultural genocide, there are tribes who lost their language or have nearly lost their language. But there has been a push for our younger people to learn the languages. So like my tribe has like a word of the week, like on social media, which is really convenient. That shows us how to spell it and how to say it. So there's this push that we learn our language again. Spirituality. So when I'm talking about spirituality, I'm not talking about religion. So Native people can adhere to any different kind of religion. I'm also not going to talk about sacred ceremonies, because those are not shared with non-Native people. But spirituality, it's hard to explain to non-Native people. One thing is we believe our ancestors are with us all the time. I believe my ancestors are with me. I believe my ancestors are the ones that are forging my journey. I believe they're with me at all times and that they guide me in everything I'm doing. There's some Native people, most of the Native people I know have visions. These are hard to explain. It's just, we know things before they happen. We know things that we shouldn't know, but we don't talk about this. And we don't talk about this because we know how people respond to it who don't understand our culture and who have never experienced anything like that. So even my son, when he first started getting his visions and I started working with him and he was working with a therapist, I was like, you can't talk about your visions, because, we could be very quick to give a diagnosis of schizophrenia or another diagnosis if we don't understand the cultural context of that. Arts are very important to Native culture. So many tribes have different dances and songs and chants that will be used at powwows and different ceremonies. Weaving is very important. Like I told you, I learned how to weave baskets, weaving tapestry, just expressing yourself that way. Beading, I did a lot of beading work whenever I was learning my culture, making jewelry, beading belts, different things. I can remember my grandfather would whittle. So he was a lot into woodwork and he would make little totems, little animal totems, and he taught my brother to do the same thing. And I'm going to end with Native family structure. So just like our culture, our family structure is collective, and elders are held in the highest esteem. In the Native culture, the elders have already lived a lot of their life. They have a wisdom that we can't possibly have because we haven't lived that. We have a deep respect for our elders. The family is very tribal. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to tell you a story as to what this looks like. The children are in the middle of the tribe. We care for the children. My children are always with me. They've been involved in every part of my life. I'm involved in every part of their life. But I was at an event, and there was a social worker from Washington State who worked with indigenous tribes. And she asked the question, she was like, I don't understand how this works, because they'll bring a kid in and it's like the parents aren't the parents. So I explained to her, that's because as parents, we know we can't give our children everything they need, and that it takes many people to give them what they need. So the whole tribe is invested in that child, and different members of that tribe give that child different things. So the children truly belong to the tribe. I don't live near my tribe. I don't live near my son's tribe, but I have built a tribe of people to be those other parents for my kids. So similar to the history, I barely scratched the surface of culture, but I'm hoping that it helps when we move into this next part of the therapeutic engagement. Okay, so tribal history and culture can and most likely will impact therapeutic engagement. When working with tribes or Native people, clinicians should research the history of the tribe and review the tribal website. I've embedded the Mohawk tribal website in the slides because that's the land I'm currently on. When you're on the website, you want to look for a few things. What happened to the ancestors of this tribe? Were they removed from their land? The answer is almost always going to be yes. There's a few tribes that are on their ancestral land, but not a lot. And what happened during that movement? How did that impact the tribe? How did the cultural genocide impact the tribe? Anything you can read about that's important. How does the tribe support its people? So there's usually a tab that'll say something like social services, services, something like that. Click on that tab. There's almost always services for elders, for children. Most tribes have stuff for veterans and different groups within the tribe. So you're just looking, how do they support their people? How does the tribe observe culture? Now, sometimes there'll be a cultural tab that will talk about some of the cultural things they do, but other times you might be able just to look at a calendar of events and see what are they doing. And that will tell you a lot of times how they are observing culture in different ways. What language is used, and are they doing things to revive the language? And important, because we're talking about addiction or problem gambling, how do they frame addiction? As you're looking at these things, it's really self-reflection. So how does the information you found out, how does it impact your thoughts about working with tribal members? So be very reflective in this process of how this information changes you and your perspective. On a macro level, when you're working with tribes, deference should always be given to tribal elders, tribal leaders, and Native clinicians. The tribes existed in the United States for thousands of years before the Europeans came, and they were fine. They were healthy, running societies. So the tribes usually have what they need to heal themselves, but what we seldom have, or what we lack sometimes, are resources. So it may be helpful going in with, how can we support you in what you're already doing to support your people? Is there a bridge we can help? In anything like that. When working with individuals, non-Native clinicians should ask, what are your goals for treatment? So again, this goes back to autonomy, and this is kind of twofold. So one may be, are you looking for harm reduction or abstinence, if we're talking about problem gambling or addiction, and seeing what they're framing their goal as. And then the other part of this is coping strategies. So for a Native person, their goals for treatment may include more of getting in touch with their culture and engaging more in cultural activities. So just something to keep in mind. And then you should always ask them, how do you connect with your culture? And then listen to what they say, and then see if you can incorporate that connection into your treatment plan. And then you should always ask if there's anyone that the person would like to invite into their sessions. Again, we are a collective culture. So they may want to bring an elder or a spiritual leader or a family leader in, or a family member in with them. That may be very important to their healing. Okay, now I'm going to talk specifically about problem gambling. Okay, I put a link in here to the NYCPG website, which does a much better job than I could ever do of defining problem gambling. They have the DSM-5 criteria, everything on there. And again, I'm just going to reiterate, I'm not a clinician, so I'm not going to do any clinical talk. This is about engagement. So I will say that we do have higher rates of problem gambling in the Native communities. Silver Wolf is a Cherokee researcher, and he estimates that the problem gambling rate among Native Americans is at 2.3%, and that's more than double the rate among all adults. So I can't talk about problem gambling and not talk about casinos. And it's really important to differentiate that these two things are not the same things. Casinos and problem gambling are not the same thing. And it would be like saying, you know, food and an eating disorder are the same thing. Like, so I think that's really important, that when we're talking about problem gambling, we're talking about addiction and addiction issues such as neuroscience, coping strategies, compulsions, things like that, not about casinos. So the role of casinos in tribes. As of 2019, 28 states had tribal casinos. In 2018, those casinos earned $32 billion in revenue. Again, that tribal autonomy and self-determination is incredibly important. And I do want to point out that the revenue from tribal casinos tend to go directly back to tribal services and to members. My son's tribe has a casino, and he receives 2 checks a year from the proceeds from that, in addition to the other resources the tribe offers its people. So I pulled off language from 3 different tribes just to show you how the tribes discuss their casinos. So the first is my son's tribe, Cheyenne and Arapaho. And then I have Seneca and Mohican. You can see in all 3 tribes that they all use the phrase protecting tribal assets. They're protecting the assets of their people, and they're doing that for the people today and for the future generations. The other terminology that you can see that I've underlined in here is that they run the tribes with integrity. So making sure that they adhere to Native culture and Native principles is at the highest level when we're talking about casinos. Okay, I want to just touch on substance use disorders and Native people. I even hesitated to put these numbers in here because this is not how we talk about it as Native people. We know that we have high rates of substance use. I have had a lot of non-Native people like talk to me like, is everyone an alcoholic or is everyone an addict? And it's a very insensitive question because it's not the way we think about it. And so I'm going to start with a personal example to tell you how we frame the substance use disorders. So my grandfather was an alcoholic and addicted to tobacco. We all knew it. It wasn't like a family secret. However, we didn't view him as Grandpa the alcoholic. He was incredibly smart. He graduated high school at the age of 14 and taught high school classes until he enlisted in the Army and then went to World War II as a Cherokee and fought in World War II as a Cherokee. He came back and he worked for Boeing and he did the calculations for the space shuttle. He was a quiet man, clearly had endured trauma that he did not speak about, but he liked to read a lot. He liked to do puzzles. So when we talk about him, that addiction part is a very little part of who he was as a person. And then I also just pulled some language from the different tribes so you can see how they frame substance use. So again, my son's tribe, I'm just going to go over some of the underlying things. So as you can see, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, they're saying culturally competent treatment. They're promoting healthy lifestyles and choices while also providing encouragement, empathy, and assistance in the treatment and recovery process. They're incorporating culturally competent treatment. They use the White Bison and Red Road 12 Brevity, which is similar to the 12-step program, but with Native principles, sweat lodges, and cultural activities. So you can tell they're looking very holistically at the person, and there's no stigma. You're here, here's how we're going to help you. The Osage Nation, my cousin is a member of the Osage Nation. And again, using cultural principles and traditional activities in their treatment of substance use. The Mohawk, self-empowerment, traditional teachings, utilizing a non-judgmental team approach. I like this phrase, a journey of hope, healing, and wellness, holistic, spiritually focused, and trauma-informed. Most importantly, each participant is guided through an 8-week curriculum that addresses self-discovery through traditional teachings and spiritual ceremonies. Again, going to the website, how do they frame it? So in closing, tribal identity for many people has been stripped. There's been a loss of language and cultural traditions and ancestral land, or there's been an attempt to strip the identity. There's also been exploitation of animals and land in our society, which impacts Native people. Native history and culture may and probably will impact therapeutic engagement. Addiction treatment should be holistic, empathetic, and incorporate Native culture and practices. And Native people should have autonomy in their recovery journey. So thank you for listening to this. And I think we could go to some questions now.